In this episode of Girl Dad Outdoors podcast, we talk with Land Tawney about his conservation journey, Montana roots, and raising his kids with strong outdoor values, plus parenting challenges, technology's impact, and the importance of getting youth involved in protecting natural spaces. Welcome back to another episode of Girl Dad Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Today we're joined by a fifth-generation Montanan who for the last 25 years has both worked and volunteered to carry on the conservation legacy of his parents and countless others while developing the leaders of tomorrow. Land Tawney. Land, thanks for joining us.
Greg, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about where you're at now. What, 25 years, what that 25 years consist of that's led you to where you're at in your outdoor experience?
Sure. So graduated college here at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana with a wildlife biology degree. And then soon after that, I got into conservation first as a volunteer and worked volunteering for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Ended up working for them for 4 years. Awesome organization to be a part of when they were young. They're still a great organization. And then I went to work for the National Wildlife Federation and worked for them for 8.5 years and got to travel all across this country, see people in different places, work on campaigns. One of my favorites was down in Louisiana. That Gulf Coast, kind of the Mississippi River Delta is just absolutely amazing. I think that dirt's still underneath my fingernails. And then I was the CEO for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers for a decade, and really working with volunteers all across the country to make sure people have access to public lands and waters, and then the quality fish and wildlife habitat when you get there. So that's all my kind of paid gigs. I did a ton of volunteer stuff, like whether that's locally, on our local Rod and Gun Club's board. I helped found that, or I was just on a board call earlier for an organization I serve on for the Minority Outdoor Alliance that's nationwide, that I've been on for 3 years now. Volunteer and professionally, but now I'm here, and I would say that conservation is something that was deep in my bones from the very beginning, and now I have the joy of working on it to try to make sure that another generation has something to pick up that we give them.
Absolutely, no, and we appreciate that. Speaking of conservation, you talk about carrying on the legacy of your parents and countless others. Tell us a little bit about that legacy that you're trying to carry on. How did your parents go about instilling the importance of conservation in you?
I think that started as a kid where I was on my dad's back fishing the Big Hole River during the salmon fly hatch. And I was literally 2 years old. So I couldn't, throw a line, but I could sit on his back and watch what was happening. My mom taking me on hikes, ultimately hunting with my dad, where, before I could even carry a gun, I would be hiking up a steep mountain after elk, and we'd be in, a couple feet of snow, and I literally couldn't take footsteps with, I couldn't climb that mountain without putting my foot exactly in where he put his footsteps. And so I was literally following in his footsteps. And so I think, they got me in the outdoors young and early. It's just part of my life. And that's the way I grew up. I grew up out of town. We had a small creek run through our property. Swiss Army Robinson was a movie that I watched, and so I had all sorts of things around the family property. But and then they were both involved in conservation, and my parents were the first full-time conservation lobbyists at the state legislature here in Montana. My dad went on to be the first lawyer for the Elk Foundation when they started here in Montana, and then he was involved in conservation easements. My mom wrote a book about hiking with kids in Yellowstone, and when I think I was 10, and we spent 2 weeks there, just her and I. And so all that I didn't, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I didn't really pay attention to that. It was more like osmosis, It was like I'd be at meetings that they were at. I would hear them talking, but my dad passed away when I was 20 years old, and when that happened, it's kind of like the awakening of this conservation kind of legacy kind of got, and it woke up inside of me, and I've been working on conservation ever since. But it was more osmosis, I would say, until my dad died, and then I really got focused on conservation.
Well, and that's such a big part, and that's why it's so important to take your kids with, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know they're supposed to be paying attention and that this is going to be beneficial later on in life. That's a great part of the story right there. So fast forward, now you've got a daughter, you've got a son. Your parents did that with you. How have you incorporated that into bringing them up? Talk about from when they were little to where you're at now, and we'll start digging in.
So I did exactly the same stuff, and some of that, I'll tell you, like my daughter, I have a picture here in my office of my daughter on my back, and we're actually in the East Fork of the Bitterroot, and we're catching small little cutthroats. And she was 2 years old, and I remember she's in a backpack, and we're in the middle of the river. Probably there's slippery rocks, it probably wasn't the greatest idea in the world, but I've got, memories of her where I catch this cutthroat trout and I put it on my shoulder and she kind of leans over the top and her eyes just get gigantic, right? Like she can't believe that this thing came out of the water. And so the same thing that my dad did and my mom did, we kind of just immersed our kids in, the outdoors. And there's a river in Montana called the Smith River, which is the only permitted river in Montana. And it's like a 5-day float. And I've done that with my daughter now twice. I've done it with my son 4 times. But the first time we did it with the kids, I think my daughter was 7 and my son was 5. And so you're going on a 5-day trip, which is awesome because you're going to be away from everything else. There's no cell phone coverage in there. You are immersed in that landscape. But you also can't get away from the weather. And we had snow the first night, like 2 inches of snow. And at some level, like you're worried about, is this going to be too much for this kid? But they knew nothing else. And so that experience for them, what do you do with adversity? You face it. And they definitely did. And so, I've been doing that with my daughter forever, and my son, just getting them outside. And, they've, for the most part, we haven't had too many bad experiences. We've had some that might have been, in retrospect, maybe we were trying too hard. But for the majority of that, it's really, they can do more than you think they can, I think, in a lot of ways. And so, getting them out there early and often is what we've always done. And they've been a part of that.
That's awesome. If you challenge them early, they take on challenges later a lot easier. So when your daughter was on the way, how was the process of that? Because you did that with your dad.
Yeah.
Your mom was involved, but all of a sudden, like, oh man, I'm going to have this little daughter. How was it getting your arms around that and then thinking about how you're going to start these adventures with her?
When my wife first got pregnant, I'll admit, I was like, I want a boy, I want a boy, I want a boy, right? And I was the first child in my house. I had a huge connection with my dad. And as soon as we found out that we were having a girl, like my whole mind switched and I was like, I'm having a girl and I was so excited and I can't wait to, get her out and experience the same things that I do. And, I think, I never treated her like, differently than I guess I would have if she had been a boy. And so, while her friends were playing with dolls, yes, she played with dolls, but we were also, getting out on the water, getting out in the woods. I remember the first night that we went camping, we're in the tent and it's like, we hadn't introduced her to a tent yet. And so it was like this just amazing thing. And she thought it was like this big bouncy house, right? And she's literally bouncing off the sides of the tents. It's just a small tent. It's like a 3-man tent. I'm in there with my wife and her. She's rolling over us, like steamrolling us. And I'm like, she's having a great time, but we got to go to sleep. Nobody really slept that night. And we woke up in the morning and my wife is like, we got to get out of here. Like, I needed sleep. And I'm like, why don't you go to sleep? And I'm just going to go drive up the road with the daughter, knowing that, we were on a dirt road and she was going to fall asleep as soon as that truck hit the road, and which is exactly what she did. And so she went to sleep right away, and I'm right along this creek, and I'm like, man, like, I bet I can fish. She's asleep. So I rolled down the window on the creek side. I parked, rolled down the window, and then went out there and caught a couple of trout. And at some point, she woke up during that whole thing. And so she got to watch me fish. And I came back. I hadn't brought a cooler or anything, so I kept a couple of these fish, and I stuck them in a water glass that I had. And we drove back to camp, and, now we have these 2 fish. And I tell her, hey, we're going to eat those tonight. And she looks at me, and she looks at the fish, and she looks at me one more time. She's like, takes a big old bite. And And I was like, whoa, we got to cook those first. But, I think I tell that story. I mean, she was young, a couple years old. We didn't really think about it as much. Maybe we could have thought about that more and introduced that tent to her early and had it in the house. And so she, wasn't quite enamored with it when she came out. It wasn't so new. But then we just kind of rolled with the punches, and not trying to make anything perfect. That night sleep was not perfect. But I think that was a big part of it. I always was also like on her program. If she wanted to say no to something, I didn't force her to do anything. It wasn't like, no, you are going camping, or you are going on this hike, or you are waking up at dark 30 so we can go duck hunt, or like I never forced anything. And so, I think that probably helped a ton, and always made things her decision. There was one time when we were in the Frank Church Wilderness in Idaho, and we were on this super tough hike in the middle of the summer. It was hot, and like she got kind of heat exhaustion a little bit, and we were with a group of people, and I asked her, hey, like after we got some water and some food, I said, if you want to turn around right now, like we can. We were about to go up there for 3 nights, and she was 10 years old, and she said, no, I want to go. And she remembers that to this day. And now that she's, 17 years old, she's going to go off to college next year. Like, I know that she knows how to face adversity. And sometimes maybe you should go home, but it's ultimately her decision. And so empowering her, I think is probably, Greg, like one of the biggest things that I did was empower her. And so that she could be the one making decisions. And then not too much stock in these things, right? It's okay if she says no, or it's okay if it doesn't go exactly the way we want it. And then the other thing I would say is lots of candy. I think lots of candy or treats, like my dad always used to take me after we'd been out in the woods. He'd take me to go get a milkshake afterwards. And so there's always this reward at the end. And so that place is still in business, and we would go there and eat milkshakes and throw peanuts on the floor. And there's regular peanuts, you crack the shell and then you throw the shells on the floor and eat the peanuts. And she still remembers that to this day, and it was a way for her to kind of, she never met my dad, but for her to like kind of make that connection, but also to have that reward at the end of the day, and she knew that was coming after we did it a couple times. So yeah, that's a few things.
Yeah. And isn't it crazy how you create this big experience, fly fishing on the river, whatever it is for you, it's the ideal outcome, right? But at the end of the day, sometimes just sitting in that place, having a milkshake and eating peanuts is the highlight of the trip and the most important thing to her. So, I mean, that just speaks to what you just said, right? It's okay for them to say no. And also, don't worry about creating a perfectly manicured experience, because it's going to be fluid. And it's not about us anymore, right? It's you hit it on the head. It's how do you make it about her and make it the most meaningful for her, so she carries it forward. So, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say that like anybody that's spent any time in the outdoors, right? Like it hardly ever goes perfect, right? And so like we all have to be adaptable. And so I think that's just like a key, again, it's been successful, and my relationship with her is just being adaptable, especially when we're out in the woods.
That's cool. So you talk a lot about big adventures and big trips. Do you incorporate things in the outdoors just on a day-to-day basis with her, just to get her out?
When she was younger, yes. Now that she's older, she has her own program, and she's playing sports, and she's got friends. She's got a boyfriend who ultimately he lives not in the town, so that's kind of nice. But we'd take. I live on the edge of town, and we'd take. We have a field that's real close to us, and we call it the field. It's like this little park that's right on the edge of town, and we take the dogs almost every single day. And so watching them run, getting to see the different cycles of that ground, during the seasons, like when that first buttercup comes up in the spring, we were always anticipating that and going out and trying to find that first buttercup that would come up, right? Or when the lupin and the arrowleaf balsam root come up. Or like when the fall comes and the leaves are starting to go, the birds are starting to get together, and so I think that's a major one. And then around the house we have a bunch of native plants, and I've planted a bunch of those, and the kids have been a part of that, and her in particular, really helping. Just they probably get tired of me showing how these things have grown and like what is happening and like all the the animals that are utilizing these native plants, but that's an everyday thing. It doesn't happen every single day. But then we kind of look out over the city too, and so we get to watch storms come in, and that is like a pastime at my house. That like you can see a storm coming that's miles and miles away, especially in the summer. Big lightning, and so we'd sit on that back porch and watch, and I think that is again not every single day, but one of those everyday experiences, right? That taking the time, and when you got a northern flicker, which is kind of looks like a woodpecker, it lands on the deck or whatever, like taking the time and just watching that bird. And again, they probably get annoyed with me a little bit, or when the white-tailed deer are around, but trying to make those constant connections to nature, because, I like to say that, like we are part of that community, right? And the more that those kids understand that they're part of something that's just bigger than them, and that they are connected, and that they have to do certain things to benefit that community, I think is a good thing for them just to think about in life in general.
Absolutely. And my experience, I only have girls. So you have a daughter and you have a son. How different has it been transitioning those experiences from one to the other? Obviously, they're different people. But just from a daughter and son standpoint, has it been drastic? How was it to get accustomed to all of a sudden? Oh man, now there's a boy in the equation.
It's a great question. I don't think we treated them any different. They are different kids for sure, right? Like, which is always so. I mean, not always. Like, I only have two kids, but I'm surprised how different they are at some level. Besides their gender, but she's always been daddy's girl, right? And so she would want to do anything that I was doing. And so she would, experiment with things. My son, I would say, he's more of a trooper in some ways, right? Like he will like endure more than her. And not to say that she's not tough or anything or can't like deal with the outdoors. But she is like, I mean, like at some level, she's like, no, I'm done with this. And so I think that has been a difference. She, like, I think he thinks about maybe the outdoors a little bit more than she does. Though, now that she's got this boyfriend that likes to fish, she's like, Dad, I love fishing. I'm like, I know you do. It's like, I think that she kind of like, once she got into sports in high school, and friends, that kind of her being focused on the outdoors kind of changed. Where my son, he just asked me the other day, he's a freshman in high school, that Smith River that he and I have been on 4 times together, and once just the two of us, which was absolutely amazing. He was like, hey, isn't it time to put in for the Smith River permits? And so like he wants to go on that river again, right? And I think so maybe there's a difference there where he is just maybe a little bit more into it than she is, but then I think she forgets about it, but then when she's in it, she's like, oh my God, I love this, and and it brings back memories, I think, for her, but it also, it helps her be a kid again too, which isn't maybe being, bringing back memories, but she doesn't have to try. I mean, she's at this age where she's trying to almost be an adult, right? And I think she's super responsible, like way more responsible than I was when I was 17 years old, but which is, my son and I are a lot more alike that way. But I think it's good for her to, like kind of let that stuff go and like just be present and not worry about, what the next thing is, but be present in that moment.
Being 17, having a boyfriend, having friends, being in sports, doing those things outside with her, connectivity, electronic connectivity. How does that play in? Does that play a part into her wanting to go, into her not wanting to go? Or is she pretty okay with being disconnected for a bit?
We went into the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, which is like this, 1.1 million acre wilderness. It's absolutely amazing, lots of lakes. And this was when she was a freshman, and she had to put the phone down, and that was a major problem. And, she was doing Snapchat which is like you have to keep these streaks, which is ridiculous. And so she gave her friend like the back end of her phone so she could keep these streaks going. That drove me nuts, Craig. Like it drove me nuts that she was thinking about that. And like that first like half day, maybe even the first day, I could tell she was still in that world. But then she got away from kind of that technology, and we were in the wilderness, which I am so thankful for. There's not, cell phone coverage in there, at least where we were. And, after that day, she was immersed in it again. She's making like little, she's a freshman in high school, and she's making like troll houses, out of moss and like little pieces of wood, and acting like a kid again, and not constantly hooked into this thing. And so I think it's an example. Sometimes they have to be removed from it. That Smith River, you can't have it. I also, like when she's taking pictures when we're on the outside and she's showing that to friends, that's another way for her to communicate on what she's doing, right? And so who am I to say, no, you can't do that while we're out here? It's kind of a part of her life. And so if she's, she's sharing her experiences and showing that to her friends, saying this is pretty dang cool, I think that's not a bad thing. And so it's a struggle though, I'm on my phone too much and probably record things too much on my phone instead of being immersed in it, sometimes.
Yeah. And way to shout out the Boundary Waters as a native Minnesotan, only living a little ways away. It's for anyone who hasn't experienced it, it's pretty magical. So it's
we saw otters, Greg. We saw these otters. We saw them from like, I don't know, half a mile away on this lake. And they came by us at probably 20 yards in front of us, like right where our campsite was. And they were talking to each other the entire time. It was like, for me, that was an experience. But those kids, they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. And so what a gift that is, from the Boundary Waters to those kids. And, hopefully for future generations for a long time.
Absolutely. You were indoctrinated by your parents because of what they did. Now you've continued the same path. How are you incorporating the kids into that conservation legacy? Do you have them involved in anything from a youth standpoint, or is it once again by osmosis, just by what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Great question. So this is another huge difference between my son and my daughter. So like my daughter, she's been around, kind of like my conservation career, for the last 17 years. And as the kind of CEO of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, when I first started, I was the first full-time employee. And so we were small. And I hustled that entire time I was there, but especially in the early years where I would go to places and get up on, on top of a table and talk to people about our organization, and I try to get them more engaged, and and then through my volunteer efforts at our local rod and gun club, Hellgate Hunters and Anglers, she would see me do the same thing. And so she would try to steal the microphone from me, and she really she knew that like people were listening to me and they were watching. And so she'd steal it, and then she'd get it, and she'd have no idea what to do with the microphone once she got it, right? And so but she knew that she wanted to kind of be a part of that. And so she is, it wasn't osmosis with her. She really, she made the decision. Again, I didn't say, hey, you should pay attention to this. She just kind of made the decision to pay attention. And so she wrote poems about public lands, She's like 11 years old. She would do, her work at school, if it was anything that she could kind of dictate, it'd be around conservation or the outdoors. I loved, her teacher one time, I think she was in 4th grade. They had to do how to do something, right? These kids had to do a how-to and write the book, and it was, it was kind of like a story about it. And her teacher's smiles at me when we come in for the teacher conference, and she's like, I can't wait to show you her how-to. And I'm like, all right. And it was how to breast a duck. And it was graphic, but very good instructions. And she had done that a ton with me in the back of the truck when we got home. And so it was part of her life, and then civically, I took her out to Washington, D.C. when she was an 8th grader. Instead of doing a trip with all the kids, I took her out there, just her and I. And, she got to go see senators in their offices. We stayed real close to the Supreme Court. And so she got to see that. Now that she's going to college, she wants to go into political science. And she wants to go into political science because she wants to make a difference. And all these experiences that she's been a part of, she paid at our state legislature this last year. And so she was there for 2 weeks. running back notes for the legislators back and forth. And then she went to girls' state this summer, got elected to, the Supreme Court or whatever, got to see like the Montana Supreme Court. But I've always wondered if these experiences are going to be like, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. Well, all it's done is just make her want to do it more. And so, that again, it was her own decision, but I never hesitated on having her involved. Where my son is like, again, like he's probably more into the outdoors right now than she is at some level, but he could care less about the conservation side. I mean, I think he cares about it. I should take that back. He cares about it, but he's not as interested. And so I'm just hands off, right? Like I don't want to like push him into doing something he doesn't want to do. But, he goes to meetings, he watches me speak. He's seen me on plenty of, like panels and stuff. And, he's gone to events with me. But it's not like, it's not as much as what she was doing. And I think that's just her gravitating towards it.
Oh, that's super cool. And that's something, even I don't work in conservation, right? But I've always included the girls in what I do. So even when they were 5 or 6 years old, if I had a coffee meeting with someone, I'd bring 1 or 2 of them with. So they can sit there, they can learn how to interact. They can see what it takes to have an adult conversation, and that in order to make a connection and have a relationship, it's just simply conversation and being real. So I think your example of bringing them with in all of those aspects, and your daughter choosing to follow, and your son choosing to take advantage of what you and your daughter are maintaining for him, which is public land access, right? It all works out. But I think that's important. It's, work, yes, it's very important, but including your kids in it can be very beneficial for everyone.
Totally. And I just, as you're talking, I kind of remembered too, like, when my son and I got out of the last time we were on the Smith River, we were coming back and we were listening to some podcasts on the way home. And he you never know if they're listening, finally we get off the river, he has his phone. And so he's talking to all his friends. And like right before we got home, he referenced something that was said on the podcast about conservation, right? And I was like, oh, he was listening, And so I think like you said, and I've kind of been a theme of this conversation too, is exposing them to things, and letting them take that out on their own time, right? And so he just had to process that a little bit.
All right, Land. What have you been doing lately? It's the middle of winter in Montana. What have you been up to?
So we just got through the holidays, and then we went out to Seattle for a soccer tournament. Both kids had soccer out there, which was awesome. It was like almost spring out there, so there was flowers and stuff. But then we came back to Montana, and I was talking about how it's warm these last couple of days, but actually we got about 10 days of cold. And so finally got some hard water, and so we could go ice fishing. And so we went up to a lake, and we went ice fishing with my son brought a friend, and then my daughter brought her boyfriend. And it was just us 5, so my wife didn't come along. We spent the night at my mom's cabin. And we ice fished the night when we got there, and then when the next day we fished, I think for like 4 or 5 hours in the morning, and so it was absolutely awesome. The fishing for the boyfriend was amazing. He caught a bunch of fish, and then my daughter worked really hard to catch one fish, but that one fish she caught, it's like, I think she forgets how fun it is sometimes, right? And that pull on the end of the rod, and then and when you're ice fishing, it's just when that fish comes out of the hole, you have no idea how big that fish is. I mean, you can feel it a little bit, but until it comes out of the hole, you don't. And it's just that awe experience, right? And that happened this last weekend, and to see her with those eyes again, and look at it in that way, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. So you brought up something that my daughter's a little older, so I've had to experience this. Your daughter's a senior in high school, a boyfriend. Now you're going fishing. Now you're bringing the boyfriend with. How is it sharing those experiences with her boyfriend and her now?
It's a good question. If he wasn't a good kid, it'd be a problem, right? I mean, I think she's the one that, found this dude. And he's a great kid. And I got lucky that he's such a good kid, man. And not, I won't talk any trash about boyfriends before, but this boyfriend is great. And he loves the outdoors. He grew up in a family over in Bozeman, so that's about 2.5 hours away, where, he fished and hunted, isn't fishing and hunting his entire life. And so he loves the outdoors. In fact, he probably fishes more than I ever have in my life. Like, he fishes every single day, pretty much. And so, to have her be proficient at casting, she can tie her own flies. They can go on dates where they're going out. And so, as much as, she's going to be going to college next year, and I want to spend every single moment with her because she's going to be gone soon, I also, am sharing her, I guess, with him. And I just know that they're doing pretty cool stuff when they're together, right? And whether that's fishing or hiking, they've been out together in the woods and on the water. And so, it makes it so much easier that he's a good kid. He's going to go into the Merchant Marines. He's been accepted there, or he's thinking about West Point. Shout out to Sam. He's a great kid. Yeah, so wow. I feel very lucky. Now, if it's a different situation and the kid that I didn't like that was taking her away, this will be a way different conversation.
Yeah, it'd be a hell of a lot harder to get her to go places when it's like, honey, it's just you. This isn't a plus one. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, but also good job on you, right? Because just think of the confidence that gives her when she's proficient at the things that he likes to do. So he loves to fish, he loves to hike, maybe he hunts. She knows how to do all that. Like, she can be a part of it, and instead of being a drain, instead of him doting on her. So great job on that.
Well, I think it's good for her too, right? Like, I think it's like, she doesn't have to dote on her, but for her to be confident, like kind of like Absolutely. You said, like, she's like, I don't need you, I can tie my own fly on, I can cast to my own fish. Like, I think like that for her, and that confidence as a young woman, like the things that the mistakes she's made, I continue to make mistakes all the time in the woods, and she's made plenty of them, but she's learned from those, right? And so I think with learning from those mistakes, and just, I think she's well equipped, I would hope, for the world now, since she's going to be going out into it, and I can't watch over her, and again, she's been on her own at some level, for the last few years anyways.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest themes, regardless who I talk to on this podcast, just the confidence that's instilled in these girls in the way that you bring them up, doing things in the outdoors. Like you said, from 2 years old, not even knowing what a tent was and just going crazy inside of it, to being in a backpack, looking at a fish, to all of a sudden now she's out with whoever, wherever, and she knows what to do. She's confident, and that just allows her to carry herself in such a different manner, and people notice that. So that's one of the great benefits of bringing these kids up in the outdoors. So once she's gone, how are you going to handle with that? Is she going a long ways away to school? Like, what do you got? What are you thinking here?
Well, so you're going to get a kick out of this, but she's going to Pacific Lutheran University, which is over in Tacoma, Washington. And Tacoma is right on the ocean. Ocean is something that I don't have a lot of experience with. I have some. But so she lives in Tacoma, or she'll live in Tacoma, that's where the school is. But Gig Harbor, which is kind of famous at some level, is in Washington. It's right on the ocean. It's right on the Puget Sound. My wife and I have already been there twice. I've started to meet the guys at the trout shop. They both we exchanged numbers the last time I was there. I mean, it's gonna be rad. And so, I'm gonna go out there, and she's gonna be playing soccer in college, which is gonna be awesome. So we'll be going out there and watching games. And so, instead of the usual, kids leave and they just come back on Thanksgiving and Christmas in the summer, we'll be seeing her in the fall, and I'll be going out there as much as possible and fishing. And so that'll be one way for us to stay connected. Absolutely. Have shared experiences, and I hope, one of my hopes for this next year is that we'll stay in Gig Harbor, and then she'll come to kind of get away from, that whole school life and just chill out with the family. And then we'll be able to get her on the water, while we're there. But things are going to change, and I know that this summer, we're going to try to get out and as much as we can, on the water and in the woods. But, it's also, we haven't talked about this yet, and I don't know how it was with your three girls, but there's also some kind of competition for, I think, attention in some ways, but also Absolutely. Just, the room is filled up. My daughter has a big, huge personality, and so that room is filled up a lot of times by her, and all in a good way. and she's going to be gone now, and so there's going to be that void, but then my son is going to be able to flourish and step into that a little bit more. And so I think that, as much as it's going to pain me that she's not going to be in my house anymore, because besides all the outdoor stuff, I just love talking to her. But it's also going to be an opportunity for my son and I to grow closer too. And I really truly believe that. And again, I don't know how it was with you, but him being the only kid in the house, I think is going to be awesome at a lot of levels. And then she, we'll figure out ways to get together again in the outdoors.
Yeah, no, because the three oldest were only 20 months apart. So a single and then twins. And then there's London, who was 4 years younger. So for 4 years, we just had London. She just moved out this year. And it was so weird going from chaos to individual attention. But it was
Totally.
it just changed the dynamic. So yeah, that is something to look forward to. Also, empty nesting is something to look forward to, because as the dad of four daughters, they can get broody. They spend a lot of time in their rooms and text you what they want, but it's amazing how much you talk to them once they leave the house. That's been a pleasant surprise. So Land, as you continue, what are some of the things that you're working on? Is there anything you wanna guide the listeners to that you want to draw their attention to that you're currently working on, or is it kind of a slow moment for you?
It's not a slow moment right now. There's not a dull moment at all. I work mostly on federal policy, right? And so there's a lot going on at a federal level when it comes to hunting, fishing, conservation. We talked about one already, and it's the boundary waters, right? So they're the boundary waters, northern Minnesota, most visited wilderness. I think it's and has been since it was established in 1964. There's a copper nickel mine that's proposed a quarter mile south. And, I think we need copper, we need nickel, but as you well know, this place is full of water up in northern Minnesota. The Rainy River, that watershed, it all flows north there, so into the boundary waters and then up into Canada, ultimately into the Hudson Bay. And there's never been a copper nickel mine in the history of the world that has not leached toxic stuff. And so, not a good place for a mine. The House just passed some legislation that helped fast track that mine, and now it's moving over to the Senate. And so, no matter who you are listening to this, if you've never been to the Boundary Waters, it's got, I think, 70% of the fresh water in the entire National Forest system. So it means something, even if you don't hunt and fish or want to go paddle there. But there's an opportunity in the Senate, really, to help stop this. And so we're having people call their senators, to try to convey to them that we're not against mining, but we're against mining in this place. So I think that's a major one that we're working on.
And is there somewhere people can go to get more information on that, Land?
Totally. So we have a Instagram account. So I currently, we haven't talked about this yet, but I currently work for I'm the co-chair of American Hunters and Anglers, and so on social media that's just American Hunters Anglers, no and. We're up every single day. So we've been talking about the boundary waters a lot, but we talk about other issues too that are, again, facing kind of hunting, fishing, anything outdoors, and then just conservation in general. But yeah, then, if folks aren't going to go on Instagram, you can also call your senators, right? And that switchboard is 202-224-3121. And then you just tell them where you're from and they can patch you right in. And so you can talk about whatever issue you want. And so I think making phone calls right now is super important. And then also, engaging on social media is another way to really get the ear, I would say, of these elected leaders.
Yeah. And, that goes to something that I've spoken about a number of times on this podcast, Land. It's the sense of urgency about getting out, right? Like you just talked, Boundary Waters is an unbelievable place. If a nickel mine gets in there, it's going to leach. Stuff is going to happen. The landscape is going to change. There needs to be a sense of urgency for people to get out and experience these things because they're not the same tomorrow as they are today.
Yeah, I think there's that sense of urgency. It's also our responsibility to do something about it too, right? When I think about I talked about my parents earlier. But we also stand on the shoulders of, Theodore Roosevelt and Aldo Leopold and all these, Rachel Carson, these great people that came before us in this kind of, modern day conservation history in this country. And, now we're at where we are, we're enjoying these things. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt set aside the Superior National Forest in 1909 to help protect the boundary waters. And so now it's just our turn to do our part, right? And that the advocacy never goes away. And I think, Edward Abbey, who, wrote a bunch of books and, he said, kind of be a part-time advocate. And what he meant by that is you got to get out in the woods and on the water, just as you described, and so that you know kind of what you're trying to protect and get that fire in the belly. And again, maybe it's not here that we have in mind, and maybe it's someplace else. Maybe we, do oil and gas development in a different way. But you don't get that connection to the outdoors without being out there, right? And, I think that people, you need to, look and listen and feel and touch, and just the outdoors can provide you so much, that solace, of just getting away from all the noise that's out there. And then when you come back, remember where that came from. That came from the outdoors, and none of the outdoor opportunities that we have in this country in particular happened by accident. It was all these decisions that were made really since the late 1800s that we valued, public water, we valued public land, we valued public wildlife. And so that's why we have all these opportunities today and experience these things. And so none of that's going to be carried forward, without effort. And so I just, get out there, get your fingers wet, get your feet dirty, and then realize, that you got to do something about it to make sure that it stays that way.
Absolutely. And that's another reason to get your kids out there, right? Just like we said in your introduction, cultivating that next generation of leadership. You never know what that kid's going to gravitate to when you take them outside when they're young. We're not going to be around forever. Someone else has to carry the torch. So perfect. Land well. With that, I like to end, if you can think back, think of the listeners, think of the dads out there. They're trying to figure out a way to integrate themselves into their daughter's life, utilizing the outdoors. What's one tip you can leave everyone with that you found that is just simple to implement but is meaningful?
All right, so maybe I got a couple here. I think there's one that I would say that I kind of mentioned, but figure out what their favorite sweet treat is, or their favorite kind of thing, and be like, hey, let's get out into the woods or on the water, and I'm gonna bring Skittles or whatever it is, right? Whatever is their favorite. And I think this one, you're having a conversation with them about what they like the most, right? Which you probably should know already, but by asking them that question, then they get to decide. Then you're like, all right, I'm gonna go get that cupcake or whatever it is, and we're gonna enjoy it on that trail. We're gonna enjoy it, as we're sitting next to that creek. I think that one, it's bribing at some level, I guess. I don't know, motivation at another. I think
it's carrot versus stick mentality.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think the stick is, the wrong approach.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think that, that would be a big suggestion from me. Plus, if you're hunting or if you're fishing, it keeps them quiet too, because they're eating, which is sometimes beneficial. And then, I think like I said it earlier, but don't have expectations. Or you're going to have expectations, but don't just rely on those expectations. When things aren't going right, or the weather change and they don't want to be outside, or they have a headache today and they don't want to go out, do not force them to do things. I mean, there's parts of me that kind of wish sometimes I would have no, you're going to do this no matter what. But I was always worried about, making them recoil then, associating the outdoors or us getting out with something bad or punishment or something they didn't want to do, right? And so if it's not working out that day, just be humble enough and let go of those expectations and come home or not go at all. And I think that, that's frustrating inside. I mean, as a dad, that's happened to me before. And then you're like, oh, that would have been so awesome if we had just gotten out there. But like, I just don't think you want to force anything. Don't use that stick. Use that carrot as much as possible. And then once you find something that they like, man, even if it's not something that you totally like that's in the outdoors, do that over and over again with them, and maybe you'll start to like it more. But at the very least, you're getting them outdoors, and so they have more of a desire to do other things maybe that you like. So those would be I guess I used 3 there. Sorry about that.
No, hey, that's awesome. We appreciate it. You're an overachiever. Well, Land Tawney, we can't thank you enough for being on the Girl Dad Outdoor podcast today. Everyone, call their senator. Anything else you wanna leave the listeners with before we take off?
No, I get one last thing is just that we are part of a community, right? And when I say community, kind of like this natural community. And the farther we get separated from the natural community, the less connection we have to clean air and clean water, the less connection we have to our food. And so all this idea of getting out there, it does so much for us. It provides, entertainment, it provides solace, but also keeps us connected, and so that we want to, help protect these things. And so I just get your kids out, get out yourself, and stay connected and be a part of that community. And so that, I think that it'll enrich your life and hopefully, make sure that we have clean water and clean air going forward.
Thanks again. And everyone, we'll see you next time on the next episode of Girl Dad Outdoor Podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
4 girls running free down a gravel road. Barefoot dreams where the tall pines grow. Each one different, strong and true. I just thank God I get the view. From sunrise lines to fire